Hey everyone, in this tutorial we're going to see how to use our YubiKey within our Vue.js and Node.js web application. So essentially, think of it this way: there's certain services like Gmail and certain financial services. They allow you to use hardware tokens as your two-factor authentication. We want to add that functionality to our own web application. So after the user logs in with their username and password, we want to prompt them to say, "Hey, enter your hardware key." So that way we can validate that you are who you say you are without using, say, time-based one-time passwords or similar. So this would be using FIDO U2F as the standard here. So there are some requirements that you must be aware of before going into this particular tutorial. The first requirement is that hardware keys will not work without an HTTPS certificate. So if you try to create this application along with me and you try to test it locally, it will not work unless you have a cert. Now, luckily, in a previous tutorial, which I've also written about and recorded about, I showed how to create a self-signed certificate for Mac OS, which allows you to use HTTPS locally. It is an option. There are other options, but that's on you. The second thing is, well, you have to have a YubiKey. So this is a hardware key. You can pick them up on Amazon. I'll include a link to them in the description of this video. But you need some kind of key that allows for FIDO authentication. And then finally, we won't be using a database. So we're going to be doing some hard coding inside of the application. But typically you'd want to store certain information inside the database, and I'll point that out as we go along. Lastly, so when it comes to serving your Vue application, because we will be using Vue, you can't just say Vue or npm run serve. You have to build it, and you have to serve it through some kind of protocol that allows for HTTPS. So I'll be using Caddy. But you may have to set up, say, Apache or Nginx. It depends. It's all up to you. But at least you'll have the gist of it, so that way you can go and implement it on your own. And if you get stuck, I'd be happy to help in the comments of this video as well. So I do have the example from my previous video tutorial. Essentially, all I did was I created a certificate, and I created a Node.js application that used Express and that certificate. So the next steps, what we want to do is we want to add on to this Node.js tutorial. And what we can do is we can go back into our terminal here. I'm going to stop this application, and we're going to install a few more dependencies. So we're going to say npm install. We're going to say express session. So this is going to be necessary because when we start working with our hardware key, we're going to have to send a challenge to the user, and that challenge will have to be stored server side as well. So a session on the server would be easy. We're also going to install a package called U2F for our hardware key. We're going to install cores because our Vue application is not going to be running on the same port as our Node.js application. So we'll need to handle cross-origin resource sharing. And we're also going to say that we want the body parser. So that way we can have request bodies in our post requests and similar. And I'm going to say save. With those installed, the next thing we want to do is we want to go back into our code. We can start importing the rest of those dependencies that we just downloaded. So for one, we can say constant body parser equals require body parser. We can say constant cores equals require cores. And we can say constant session equals require session, and I think that was it. If another one pops up, we'll go ahead and add that as well. Oh, actually, we want to add the U2F. So constant, and we're going to call this one U2F equals require U2F. All right, so we have those dependencies kind of added to our Node.js application. We need to specify a few more things. So for example, when it comes to FIDO, which would be for U2F and our hardware keys, we have to specify an application ID. So typically that would be an ID associated to your application. So what makes the most sense in this circumstance would be to use our URL of our front end. So this would be the application ID that our server and our front end both are familiar with. So we can actually define that. So we're going to say constant. We're going to say app ID equals HTTPS, because again it has to be HTTPS. This is going to be running on localhost for our testing. But when I do serve it, I'm going to make sure I'm running it on port 2015. So we can change that up, but that's what it's going to be for now. And I just noticed that this is supposed to be express session, not session, for our include. All right, so we will need to now configure Express Framework, and then after we configure Express Framework, we can start defining our endpoints. So let's go ahead and do some configuration. So we need to configure cores, we need to configure our session, we need to do things like that. So first, let's go ahead and say app.use session. Inside session, we're going to specify some parameters here. We're going to define a secret. This is going to be something that only the server should know about, and it should probably be something that can't be guessed. But I'm going to call it the polyglot developer. Again, make it more secure on your end when you do it in production. We want to specify some information about the cookie. So we're going to say that it is going to be secure because we're using HTTPS. And we're going to specify an age. Let's go ahead and just specify, I don't know, 60,000 seconds or something. It doesn't really matter. You specify whatever makes the most sense for you when it comes to the age of your sessions that are stored. Next up, we're going to say app.use. We're going to say, you know what, we want to expect body parser to allow JSON. We want to allow the body parser to use URL encoded data. I can't seem to spell correctly today. Extended is true. So this is common Express Framework setup. The next up, we need to specify a configuration for our cores. So when it comes to our cross origin stuff, so we're going to say app.use. We're going to say cores. We're going to specify the origin that's allowed to use this. So origin. Our origin is going to be our app ID, so what we specified previously. And we're going to say that we're allowing credentials. And we're allowing credentials because this is HTTPS, and we want the cookie to work between the two ports or the two hosts. The cookie as well as all of the authentication headers. So this is important when it comes to the YubiKey. So we'll go ahead and add that. So those are all of our configurations. We also do want to add kind of a mock storage solution when it comes to our user, because we're not going to be using a database in this example. So I'm just going to call it var user, and that's going to represent our database. And it's only going to persist for as long as this application is up and running. All right, so we have that simple stuff. We can go ahead and leave that endpoint for the root. We're not going to use it anymore, though. We can only use it for testing. But let's go ahead and start adding some endpoint functions. So when it comes to our hardware keys with FIDO, there's two steps, and each of those two steps has two of their own steps. So for example, when you first create an account with a site, or you first enable two-factor authentication, you need to register your hardware key. So the registration phase is two steps. First, the server will create a challenge for you that's sent to the client, which would be the web browser. And that challenge is taken using our front-end SDK. And we're providing a response to that registration request. So that response is sent back to the server using a different endpoint. Likewise, very similar steps happen when it comes to kind of the login step, or the authenticate state. So same kind of practice, and you'll see it as we go along. But let's go ahead and add each of those endpoints now. So the first one is app.get. We're going to say register. We're going to say request, response, next. And we'll just leave them like this for now, but we'll say app.post because the second one's going to be a post request. It's also going to be register. Like I said, they're going to share similar things. Request, response, next. And I'm going to just clone these 2 lines. So this is going to be login and login. So four endpoints are responsible for 2-factor using the hardware tokens. So the YubiKey or similar, whatever works with the FIDO U2F standard. All right, so let's go ahead and start creating those. And this is still all Node.js. There's going to be a whole set of stuff going on for Vue, but the Vue stuff can be replicated in pretty much any framework or front-end technology. So the first one is to register the get endpoint. So what we're doing is we're creating our session and we're creating our request. So we can say request.session.u2f. So that's what we're calling our session key, equals u2f.request. And we're providing the app ID that we specified above. So this is the host that we're anticipating that's going to be allowed to make this request. Next up, we want to say response.send, and we want to say request.session.u2f. Now, if I wanted to, we can actually see this in action because this is a get endpoint. So let's go ahead and start our Node server. And we're going to say, go to our web browser, refresh, make sure everything's still working. And I'm going to say register. So this is what the server is actually sending our client. So this information, this challenge information is what is important, as well as the app ID. So it's kind of like, this is how the client can trust that it's coming from the right place. And then when we send this stuff back as a signed request, the server is going to check to make sure that everything that was sent adds up, so that way nobody's trying to do some kind of man-in-the-middle kind of exploit. So we can go back into our code now. The next step is, let's go ahead and create a registration. And I won't do the login stuff until after we do our Vue application, but at least our register stuff will be ready to go because it's going to be a 2-step process. So in the register endpoint, so when we have the response, what we're going to say is we're going to say something like var registration equals u2f.check registration. We're going to be providing what's in that session. So what was our challenge information? So we're going to say request.session.u2f, and we're also going to provide the body of the response. So we're going to say request.body.register response. So this is what the client sent back after using the YubiKey. So using that information, we can actually check the registration process. So if the signature checks out, if everything checks out, we can actually say that, hey, this was successful or not successful. So for one, we're going to say if registration dot successful. So if it wasn't successful, so if this is false or null or anything, that means it failed. So we're going to say return response.status. Let's say a 500 error, send, and we're going to say message. Let's just say there was an error. We won't specify what exactly it is. Doesn't really matter as of right now. If we didn't fail, if it was successful, we're actually going to store this information. So technically we've missed a few steps here. So technically, the register will only come after the user has an account. So we would do a lookup for their account information, and after they register, we would want to store the registration information in the database. But we don't have a database. We're going to say user equals registration. So we're just going to store it kind of in the session in the currently running instance. And then we're going to say response.send. And we can say something like message hardware key registered. So something to tell them that, hey, it worked out. So we can't really test this right now because it does require that we plug in our YubiKey. So we don't have anything to really work with it yet. So what we want to do is we want to say the following. So we're going to create a new project. So we're going to create a new Vue project. So this assumes that you do have the Vue CLI installed. But we can say Vue create U2F Vue. So I mean, this is just the project title. So maybe this is fine. We're going to use the defaults. And just to note, this Vue project is being created on my desktop, so I have two different directories, so two different projects. One is the Node project, one is the Vue project. All right, so the project's good. I can navigate into it. U2F. We're not gonna worry about this npm run serve. It's not gonna work. We do need HTTPS in our project. So when we do want to test it, we're gonna have to say npm run build, and then we're gonna have to serve it. In my case, I'm gonna serve it with caddy. But what I'm gonna do is I need to install another dependency. So out of the box, as of right now at least, Vue doesn't have a way to make HTTP requests easily. One of the recommended ways is to use Axios to get the job done. I do have tutorials on that if you want to visit the blog or the YouTube channel. But I'm going to say npm install Axios -- save. All right, so that looks good. We will need to download a dependency now. So this dependency would be a front-end dependency for U2F. This is actually hosted by Google. I believe Google and YubiKey contribute to it, but it's not something that we get through npm. So we're going to have to download it as a dependency. So if I go to my web browser, maybe I can type in U2F API and see what comes up here. It's this one right here, the Google one. So it's github.com/Google U2F reference code. We can go into the demo. We can go into source. It's actually in the war directory. So inside the JS directory, and I'll read out the path again. So U2F demo war.js, and then what we want is the U2F API.js file. So I'm just going to download it. I'm going to save it to the desktop. I'm going to go back into my terminal. I'm going to say copy. I'm going to say desktop. I'm going to say U2F API.js. And where I want to actually copy it is I want to copy it to the public directory of my project. It's public directory is just at the root, but I'm going to copy it into public. All right, so we've got that taken care of. Now we can actually start adding it to our Vue project. And I don't have the Vue project up in my Atom editor right now. Let's go ahead and open it. Again, this is a different tab in my terminal. So I now have two instances of Atom. But what we're going to do is first we want to go into the index file, which is in our public directory as well. And we want to add that JavaScript dependency. So I can say I can say script source equals root U2F API.js and add it that way. So if it was npm, it'd be a little more convenient, but this is fine as well. So I just added it. The next step is, well, maybe we want to create a new component. So what I can do is I can go to components. Maybe I want to rename this. So we don't need a hello world anymore. I'm going to just rename this. I'm going to call it, let's call it U2F component. We're going to remove all of this template right here. Basically going to start from scratch. That's fine for now. So the style information, we can take that out too. We're not going to worry about making a very attractive looking application. We just want functionality here. Save the rest for another day. So let me fix the tabs. And a lot of that, we're still going to remove some stuff as well. All right, so I have that. What I can do now is, well, I want to create two functions. So for one, let's go ahead and remove the properties. We don't need those anymore. And we want to change this to maybe U2F component. And we want to say methods. And we want to have two methods. We want to have a register. And we want to have a login. And they're not going to be issued automatically. I know a lot of sites that implement the hardware keys, they say, you know what, as soon as you reach this page, it's going to wait for your key, but we're going to activate it based on button press. So we're not going to worry about all the fancy JavaScript events. So I'm going to say button. I'm going to say v on click. So when this button is clicked, it's going to call the register function. I'm going to say start registration button. And I'm going to do something similar for the login. And it's going to be start login. So pretty easy stuff right now. Nothing too complicated. So we do have the register code in place, both functions, so we can actually start working on it as far as our method goes. So the first step is, well, unfortunately, as of right now, and I know this is improving every day, but only Chrome is supported when it comes to these hardware tokens. I think Firefox is close. Safari might be working on it as well. But right now, we actually do have to check for support because not everything is supported. So we can actually say if window.u2f and window.u2f.register. So we're basically saying, you know what, as long as this browser is supported, then let's go ahead and use it. We're going to make our first Axios call. So the first Axios call is going to be the request for the challenge information. So we're going to say Axios. We're going to provide the method. So the method is going to be get. The URL is going to be HTTPS localhost /register. And then we're also going to specify that we want to use credentials. So this is for the session. Otherwise, we're going to get some weird results with our session, and it's not going to work out quite correctly. I think the most difficult part for me when trying to figure this stuff out was the session stuff. So we don't want that to hold us back. So with credentials, true. And then this is a promise. So we're going to say then result, and what's going to happen when this actual request is made. So we need to figure that out. So in theory, we get the information from this register endpoint. It's just the challenge information and the app ID. So now this is where we actually register with our device. So we're going to say window.u2f.register. We're going to take the result. So we're going to take the app ID. We're going to pass in the result data. So everything's because we want to sign it. So result.data. We're going to leave the next field blank. That's going to be useful for our authenticate step and response. So when we register using our token, we want to send this back to the server. So we're going to say Axios. We're going to say this kind of the same steps here. Method is going to be post this time. The URL is going to be HTTPS localhost register, because remember this is a post endpoint. We're going to provide data. So we're going to say data. This is going to be an object. We're going to say register response, because that's what the server expects. Response. We're also going to provide headers because we want to specify the header information. So we're going to say headers. It's going to be content type. I'll keep scrolling a little bit. Content type. This is going to be application/JSON. So we have our headers there now, and we want to specify that we're with credentials. With credentials is true. And then finally, this is a promise. And again, I could have split this up in multiple lines, but the promise is going to be result. And what happens with the result? In theory, it's either going to say we got an error or our hardware token is registered. But let's go ahead and say console.log. We're going to say result.data. Otherwise, maybe it failed. So error. We're going to say console.error. This is going to be error. And then we probably want to catch the other promise as well. which should be right here. So this is going to be error console.error. All right, so just to reiterate one more time, so this is our register function. We're checking compatibility with our browser. We're making our first request for the challenge information. We're using our hardware key to sign that information. We're sending it back to the server, so our signed information as the response. And then in theory, we get a hardware key registered as a result. So what we do need to do is we need to build it. So we're going to say npm run build. It failed, so a module was not found because I think we renamed it. We said U2F component, but we didn't change it inside the app file, so the app.vue file. So let's go ahead and make some changes here. This is going to be now U2F component, and the file name is called U2F component. Let's remove all the style information. It's not necessary for this example. Let's fix our tab so that way it's a little easier to read. We don't need this image anymore. Hello world is no longer hello world. I think we're calling it U2F component. And we don't have any properties here, so it's just going to be as is like that. And the components is going to be U2F component. So we made some changes to the app.vue file. If you didn't rename the hello world, you don't need to worry, but I renamed it. So I saved it. Let's go ahead and try to build it again. See if we get any errors still. So it looks like it was good. It found errors probably in the linter, but nothing. I mean, I think there were warnings. So as long as that's not going to affect us, let's go ahead and add a caddy file because I will be using caddy to serve this. You do need something to serve it with a certificate. So let's go ahead and say at the root of the project, let's go ahead and say touch caddy file, and I can open this in my editor now. Let's find it here, caddy file. We do need to add some stuff, so we need a configuration for caddy. I do have a tutorial on caddy. It's very easy to use, especially for circumstances like this. But I'm going to say localhost 2015 because that's what we want to serve on. The root of our project is going to be the distribution directory, so that's our build directory. So root is going to be dist, and we need to use our key information. So I do need to add those to this project as well. So TLS, it's going to be localhost.cert and localhost.key. So let's go ahead and copy those in now because they're in the Node project right now. So I'm going to say copy. I'm going to say cert example. I'm going to say localhost. I'm going to copy both of them over into the root of our project, which should be good. So we have both of those files now. So it should be good. I saved it. I can go ahead and try to run it. So I'm going to say caddy because I do have caddy installed locally on my computer. I'm going to go back into my web browser. I'm going to close this tab. I'll leave that up. I'm going to open up another tab. I'll call it HTTPS localhost 2015. We have our two buttons there. I'm going to open up the inspector because it will be valuable for us to know. So console, nothing's happening yet. I don't have my key plugged in, but I'm going to say start registration. Axios not defined. So it looks like I forgot to import it when I tried to use it. So let's go ahead and take a look now. So let's go back into our code. Go back into the U2F component. Yeah, I forgot to import it. So that's easy. Import Axios from Axios. Unfortunately, I do have to rebuild it now. I wish there was better ways. If somebody knows a better way, I'd love to hear it. But for now, we'll just rebuild it and reserve it with caddy. All right, so it's built. I'm going to run it. I'm going to refresh the page here. I'm going to say start registration. So it showed extension JS API version 1.1. That means it's waiting for my key right now, which I'm going to plug into my USB port. I'm going to hit the button on my key. And as you can see, it says hardware key registered. So it looks like everything worked out well for us. So in theory, and we will be restarting the application for Node.js, but in theory, if the login function was working, I can hit the login button and it would check to see, based on that user variable that we're storing in the application code, to see if the key matches up. So let's go ahead and take a look at our Node.js code again. We're going to start working on the login logic, and then we're going to look at the view code. So let's go back in. So I'm going to go back to Atom. I'm actually going to change it to the other Atom project. So this is the Node.js. You can see we don't have our login functions in place. So the first one is going to look very familiar to us. So let's go ahead and make it happen. So what we're going to do is we're going to say request.session.u2f equals U2F.request. So it looks, as of now, it looks just like line 25. We're going to say app ID, but we're also going to provide the user key handle, user.key handle. So what I didn't show you, if I wanted to, I could print it out in the logs. But what's happening is when we hit the little button on our YubiKey, and it sends that post request, it's sending stuff back to the server. So it's sending the key handle, it's sending the public key, it's sending several different things, some of which is what we want to store. So we want to store the key handle, we want to store the public key. Because this information, it's kind of like a checksum. So it's going to be how the two, server and the client, actually make sure that they are who they say they are. So what we're doing is we're including the key handle in the request for login, and we're saying response.send, and we're going to say request.session.u2f. So technically we're resetting the session, and it's fine because this is just another challenge information. For the login post request, it'll be similar, not the same, but similar. It's going to be just as easy though. But what we're going to say is we're going to say var success equals U2F.check signature. So instead of check registration, we're saying check signature, request.session.u2f. We're also going to check the login response, so similar to the register response that we saw. So request.body.login response. And we're also going to check the public key. So user.public key. So this is what we're storing. Technically, what we'd be doing is we'd be doing a database lookup for this information based on the username and password that was provided in the previous step. But this is fine for us right now. We're using this locally stored user variable. So we're checking the signature that comes by. So we're making sure that it was signed by the correct key, by the correct person. And depending on what happens, we can say response.send success. And this kind of says, you know what, application, this is the correct user. Go ahead and push them on to the next step. And typically in this success stage, rather than just saying success, you'd probably pass back a JSON web token or similar. So that way it could be used in future requests, because passing a success isn't enough. People can kind of make that up. So make a spoof a copy. So typically you would want to generate a token for the user to use in future requests. But really it didn't take us a whole lot of code to get here. So we can go back into our view code. We can start working on our login function, which in reality is going to be more or less the same thing. So with that said, I can actually copy this. So I'm going to copy lines 14 through 26. I'm going to paste them in. We're just going to make some minor changes. Instead of register, we're going to say sign. We're going to change the endpoint. So the first get endpoint is going to be login. When we get it back, instead of register, what we want to do is we want to say sign. We want to use the app ID again. We want to use the challenge information. So result.data.challenge. We want to say, you know what, there's the result data. We actually don't need this anymore because we've provided it. We have the challenge, we have the data. We have the response of the signature. So we're going to use that, and we're going to send it to our login endpoint as a post request. This is going to be login response for our data, and we're going to send response as that. We're going to make sure that we have the content type is application JSON, and we're going to say with credentials is true to handle our cookies and everything. Provided everything worked out, we can say result.data, and whatever we're returning in this case, we're just returning the success is what we're going to print out on the screen. So I can save it. What I want to do is I want to build, and I also want to stop this application and rerun it. I want to rerun the Vue. So I'm going to say npm run build. I want to say caddy. I want to go back to my web browser. I will need to restart the flow again because I restarted the server and hence it wiped out the user variable. So I'll say start registration. I'm going to hit the button on my key. Hardware key registered. I'm going to go straight to the login because it's now being stored on my server. Start login, and then I'm going to hit the button, and it says successful. Again, typically you wouldn't want to just print the success. Typically you're going to print out the, well, not print out, but you're going to return the token to be used in your API requests. So let's just rehash on what we did because it was actually quite a lot of steps, but actually not too much code. So first of all, I'll look at the Node.js code. So again, have to reiterate this. It needs to be HTTPS. This got me the first time, which makes it a little more difficult when testing locally, but it is necessary. Otherwise, it won't work, and you're going to get errors that don't make a lot of sense, and you're going to do a lot of Google searching. So you do need HTTPS, so you do need a certificate. You can do a self-signed certificate. It's fine. We need to define our app ID, which would be our client. We need to set up our session information, so that way it stores the challenge information between requests. We need to set up CORS. So CORS needs to be able to allow credentials. It needs to be able to allow requests from the certain origin being our app ID. We need to set up 4 endpoints, 2 for registration, 2 for login. The GET requests, all they're doing really is creating a challenge to send to the user. And then using that challenge, you can sign it using your YubiKey, using the API library that we downloaded from Google. When we send that response back, we're just validating it. We're checking the registration, or we're checking the signature, which is similar steps. And depending on what happens depends on the response that we send. Now, just looking at the Vue code again, we only really touched this new component that we created called U2F component. We have 2 functions in there. The 2 functions do what I just said. So we're first checking to make sure that it's supported in our web browser. If it is, we can either do what I just said. So, I mean, we could do our first Axios request, which is our HTTP request with credentials to the register. We're registering using our hardware key, so we need to insert it and push the button. And then whatever the hardware key spits out, we send back to the server. And likewise, that happens during the login stage as well. So very cool stuff. Not too difficult to implement, but it adds a ton of value to your users because now you're authenticating using not a shared secret. So with time-based one-time passwords or SMS or push, there's a shared secret. So there's always the risk that somebody becomes compromised and that secret is exposed. With a hardware key, there is no shared information. So everything is public that leaves. So all the secret stuff stays on your hardware key and never leaves. So this is useful stuff.